Welcome to the new series that I am calling the Burn Book Club. I am going to be talking with personal finance authors and other areas of interest that you can learn how to save, invest, pay down debt, grow your income, have an amazing relationship. We're going to cover so many different topics, and I'm calling it the Burn Book Club. One, because my name is Bernadette Joy, but two, because I think these are the books that the patriarchy doesn't want you to read because they want you to keep staying broke, unhappy, unhealthy, and feeling unloved. And we are here to help you build the life of your dreams. So stay tuned for all of these episodes.
As someone who has litigated probably about 1,000 divorces over the past 20 years, I can say that what makes a divorce expensive is not usually the fights over how much do you get out of the house, how much do I get out of the house. What makes divorces expensive is the discovery process, meaning
Wow.
finding out what even exists. A lot of what we spend time on in divorce cases is sending out subpoenas, gathering bank statements, gathering tax returns, because there hasn't been that sharing of information.
Woo! I am oddly excited for this conversation. Who would have thought that I would have been really looking forward to a conversation about prenups? But here we are with our new friend and author, Aaron Thomas. He is the author of the Prenup Prescription. And I had to read some of these quotations to y'all because they're so good and they're people that I really admire. So, Eve Rodsky, if you don't know who Eve Rodsky is, she is the author of Fair Play, and she said about the prenup prescription that it is a must read. Erin provides the actionable education in prenups needed to help a couple engineer their own healthy and successful marriage, one set up on a foundation of transparency, communication, and fairness, the key tenets of a healthy relationship. And so, welcome, Erin. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, Bernadette.
I heard about what you were doing, and then when you got me a copy of the book, I just dove right into it. And this is odd because I've already been married for 13 years, but I work with a lot of couples who are trying to figure out how do they actually set up a successful marriage. And most people don't think of a prenup as a romantic or exciting part of getting married. So, can you start off with sharing what are some of the myths that people have around prenups or why they might be hesitant to start having a conversation around a prenup?
Yeah, maybe the most common misconception that couples have is that a prenup is just a plan for divorce, which is why I try to make a point of defining a prenup as basically it's just a set of rules that defines your financial relationship with your spouse both during and, if necessary, after marriage. People think that it is literally just you're writing out your divorce decree before you even get married. And that is the wrong way to go about looking at it.
If you're enjoying this content and want to actually take real action towards crushing your money goals, check out my new book. It is Crush Your Money Goals, 25 habits that you can use starting today to pay off debt, save, invest, and reach financial freedom. It's jam-packed with all of my best tips as a debt-free millionaire and your new money mentor. Check it out at crushyourmoneygoals.com or head to Amazon or wherever you buy books. Grab yours today.
You've already busted that myth for me because that's totally what I thought it was. So, how did you get into this? Where did this expertise come from around prenups?
I have been practicing family law, which you may take as a euphemism for a divorce lawyer, since 2007. And after doing hundreds and hundreds of divorce cases, I noticed that the same problems kept cropping up in the cases that I dealt with. And I was hit with this epiphany that uh, things don't go wrong, they start wrong. Most of the problems that
Oh.
the married couples that I was divorcing over the years had were things that existed from the very beginning of the relationship and were symptoms of their failure to get on the same page financially in their relationships when they got married. At first, I was just scared off of marriage myself. I was not married when I first started doing divorce work. And my initial take was just don't get married. That's one way to avoid a messy divorce is never to get married in the first place. But when I met the woman that I wanted to marry, spoiler alert, I've been married now for 8.5 years myself.
Oh.
and my wife is also a lawyer, we kind of sat down and thought about what could we do to avoid the pitfalls that my divorce clients got tripped up by over the years. And we started thinking about all of the different kind of guidelines we wanted to set up, kind of the explicitly defined expectations that we wanted to put out there in terms of our relationship, and realized that defining the rules for our own financial relationship in the form of a prenup answered a lot of the questions that we had about how do you combine financial lives when you're not 21 with $0 in the bank.
There's so many good nuggets in there. Let's go back to the basics of what you talked about in the book. In the very beginning, you say, so what is marriage, legally speaking? And I actually don't know that a lot of people think about marriage as like a legal kind of binding agreement. For a lot of people that I work with, it's like the wedding and the bridesmaids and the honeymoon and stuff. So, can you tell people more about what is a marriage, legally speaking? What is it?
Yeah, a marriage is a legal union that comes along with it all kinds of financial responsibilities and obligations that you have to your spouse. And yeah, it is weird to think about marriage in that context because we don't get married for money, most of us at least. We get married for love. And the financial aspect of it is kind of an afterthought if it's a thought at all. But what I like to explain to people is that there is a contract attached to those vows. It is an addendum to the end of this marital contract that we all sign that basically says once you get married, every dollar that either spouse earns is considered marital money. Your very paycheck is considered marital money. And if it were the 1960s when couples got married at age 21 and neither spouse had a dollar to their name, they didn't have any debt, 401ks hadn't been invented, credit cards hadn't been invented, it was very simple because you started and you built your financial lives together from scratch. Today, the average couple gets married closer to age 30. And that average
Mhm.
couple, each spouse has 3 or 4 bank accounts each, 2 to 3 credit cards each, a retirement account or 2 each. Maybe one has an investment account. Maybe somebody has a small business, equity in a condo or a house.
That is such a good analogy of it being a startup versus a corporate merger. I can relate to that, and that makes it a lot more reasonable as to why you'd want to spend some time and energy and money on creating this contract. I think a lot of people think about prenups as something that isn't necessary, but like now in this day and age with modern marriages starting later in life and people actually having some real assets. And I can speak to that myself. My husband and I got married when he was in his like late 20s and I was in my mid 20s, and we already had 401ks. He already bought a home. He already had a car. We had other things to discuss that we might also have with like family type of stuff. And so I'm so glad that you're educating people on this. Now, let's talk about the dreaded D word, because we mentioned it earlier that we think that prenups are just a decree for divorce. So, how do you actually convince potential clients that this is not a decree for divorce?
So I think a big part of it is talking about the benefits to a prenup that happen during the marriage itself. For example, for a prenup to be enforceable, and this is true in all 50 states in the United States, both spouses have to disclose all of their assets and debts to each other. And sometimes just that one act of transparency can be hugely beneficial for couples, right? So, like laying out your net worth statement, your personal financial statement is not exactly first date material. And so, a lot of people don't talk about it early in the courting process, but it also isn't third date material. And it turns out not to be fifth date material. And people sometimes get all the way to the point where they're getting ready to walk down the aisle of their wedding and they don't know their spouse's financial picture. They don't know how much they have in assets. They don't know how much they have in debt. And nobody wants to be surprised that their spouse has 50 grand in credit card debt that they didn't know about years into the marriage, or
Mhm.
100 grand in student loan debt years into the marriage, or tons in assets that they're not aware of. If nothing else, a prenup forces couples to have that conversation about what do you have in assets? What do you have in debts? How did you get here? And then, yes, absolutely. What do we consider to be mine? What's yours? And what's ours together? I think a lot of couples go in and one spouse may assume, yes, everything we have is ours. Everything belongs to both of us. And one spouse may think, well, certainly the assets that am bringing into the marriage should not be considered in the ours bucket. Or certainly, I don't want to be responsible for your debt, or I don't want you to be responsible for the debt that I'm bringing in. And just sitting down and having a conversation about what do we consider to be ours and what do we consider to be separate can be helpful for couples, because then that defines how do you each have access to finances during the marriage itself. Are you going to set up joint bank accounts and deposit all of your incomes into that one joint bank account? Or are you going to have separate bank accounts and your income goes into there and then you each contribute money to a joint bank account that pays for the joint expenses? And so I look at a prenup as really being, to go back to the business analogy, a partnership plan for your marriage. And just like any good partnership plan for a business, yes, there's going to be a termination clause, right? That says, how do you unwind things if the business doesn't work out? But that's not the purpose of the partnership plan. The partnership agreement is to make the business run smoothly while the business is running. The same way that the idea should be that your marriage runs smoothly, your relationship runs smoothly while the marriage is going on, because you have clear rules for how is the money going to flow in and out of joint bank accounts? Do we both have access to money? A very common thing that we'll put in prenups is a spending limit without approval from the other spouse. So me and my wife, we have a rule in our prenup that says neither one of us can spend over $500 from any joint account unless both of us approve it. And just having that kind of explicit understanding can ward off a lot of the arguments that I would see my divorce clients have over the years, where, oh, he went and bought a big truck without my permission, or she ran up a huge credit card bill and I didn't know anything about it. Just putting in place some of these guardrails can help stave off arguments that couples have about money during the marriage itself.
Y'all, my mouth is like wide open dropping right now because that I didn't know that was something you could do in a prenup, that you could put those types of guardrails, but that is so helpful because as a money coach, I can't tell you how many clients that I have coached over the last couple of years who definitely did not have a prenup, but didn't even have that basic conversation of, well, what are these guardrails that we want to have in our marriage? And so much of what people end up coming to me about is, well, oh, so-and-so like ran up this credit card bill or spends money on this thing that I don't agree with. And so then they're having to fight it out in real time versus having some of those rules of engagement, I would say, when they first started the marriage. So I love that as an example from your marriage. Let me ask you this, because I feel like I have a similar kind of conversation with clients when it comes to estate planning. Like it just feels, for them, it just feels awkward and heavy, and it's like doesn't feel like something that they want to do, and so they tend to avoid it. So for you, have you had to help clients navigate the actual like feeling and vibe of going into this with a more positive mindset? And what are some tips you have for people who feel afraid of having this prenup conversation?
Yeah, great question, Bernadette, because that is the $1 million question: is how do you even bring this up when we know that, number one, there's a stigma about prenups, and number two, money is one of the touchiest things to talk about, particularly in the context of a relationship. And so my advice, potentially unconventional advice, is don't lead with the word prenup. Prenup, it carries a lot of weight. It is a heavy word to throw out in conversation with your loved one. And if you start with that, often it can put the other person on the defensive. And so, what I recommend is that couples start with kind of the component parts of what you might put into a prenup. What is it that you actually want to accomplish? For example, if you start the conversation with, do you think it's a good idea for you and I as a couple to disclose all of our assets and debts to each other, to put it down on paper and share it with one another so that we know at least what is there? Do you think that it is a good idea for us to have some of these rules about spending limits and decide how our money is going to flow? Are we going to put everything in a joint bank account? Are we going to maintain our separate bank account and just have a joint bank account that we both contribute to? How is the money going to flow? How are we each going to have access to money during the relationship? And then other things like, should we have an annual meeting? A very common thing that people will put into their prenups. Should we have an annual shareholders meeting? Sometimes I'll call it, where we sit down and we talk about certain things on a regular basis. What did we earn last year? What did we spend last year? What's our budget for this upcoming year? Do we have any big expenses that we want to plan for? Should that be a regular part of our relationship, having an annual meeting? And then what do we consider to be mine, yours, and ours, both in terms of assets and debts? And if you can get on the same page on all of these individual items that I'm talking about, what you're really talking about is preparing the terms of your prenuptial agreement. And those are all the kinds of things that couples agree and just put it into writing. And if you're on the same page in terms of what's mine, what's yours, what's ours, how is the money going to flow, what are going to be the rules of your financial relationship, then great. You can take any of these future disputes and the nightmare scenarios you hear about couples getting stuck in 2 years of divorce litigation. You can take all of that off the table at the beginning of your relationship by putting it in writing and putting it into an enforceable document, into a prenup or a postnup, rather than just move forward in your financial relation based on assumptions that, if they're not aligned, can cause problems way before you ever get to divorce court. They cause problems in your relationship itself.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you have decided to spend a lot of your time to help people with these prenups because, like you said, there's a lot of stigma around it. A lot of my clients, like none of their parents had prenups, right? And so they would be the first one in their families to even consider doing that. But a lot of times I talk with people who are now, unfortunately, on the other side of it, meaning they are now in the thought process of potentially separating. And so could you share on that flip side, if it does end up coming to a termination of this marriage, what are the benefits of having the prenup in place qualitatively, financially? Maybe you can share some examples of what a divorce might have looked like with or without a prenup.
Absolutely. I would say the number one benefit of having a prenup like this in place is having those financial disclosures take place. As someone who has litigated probably about 1,000 divorces over the past 20 years, I can say that what makes a divorce expensive is not usually the fights over how much do you get out of the house, how much do I get out of the house. What makes divorces expensive is the discovery process, meaning
Wow.
finding out what even exists. A lot of what we spend time on in divorce cases is sending out subpoenas, gathering bank statements, gathering tax returns, because there hasn't been that sharing of information. There hasn't been the sharing of account balances on a regular basis throughout the relationship, maybe not ever in these relationships. And at that time, when a relationship breaks down, trust is at an all time low,
Mm,
communication is at an all time low.
mm,
And so one spouse can say, here's my bank accounts. This is all I have. This is what's there. Here's my statements. Here's my retirement account. And the other spouse says, how do I know that's all there is? You could be hiding money. You could be hiding something from me. And so we go into this very expensive process just to figure out what's there. You can't divide your marital estate. What's in your marital estate?
right.
Having a prenup in place means that you have at least had an occasion where everyone has had to disclose every asset, every debt, every bank account, every credit card, and put it down on paper so you have something to refer back to. And I'm a big proponent of having these annual meetings where you update these disclosures so that on an ongoing basis, each spouse knows that they're seeing every dollar and every debt that belongs to them and to their spouse. And then the second thing is keeping yourself out of the courtroom in a divorce where people pay tens of thousands of dollars on average to divorce attorneys. It's not unusual in my career to see couples spend 20 to 25% of their net worth fighting over who gets the majority of the remaining 75 to 80%. And that can compromise couples, not just their finances, but oftentimes their ability to co parent their children. A lot of people think, oh, we don't need a prenup because everything's 50-50 every way. And if we get divorced, we'll just play everything 50-50. But that's not the law. In 41 out of the 50 states,
Are you enjoying this content? Well, if you are ready to level up and actually start taking real action towards crushing your money goals, check out my new book. It is Crush Your Money Goals, 25 Habits that you can start today to pay off debt, to save and invest. It's all of my best secrets as a debt-free millionaire, jam-packed into one book for just $18. So you can find more at crushyourmoneygoals.com or head to Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, wherever books are sold, or better yet, check out your local bookstore.
The law says that the court doesn't have to divide your marital estate 50-50. They can divide it 60-40 or 70-30 based on the judge's subjective interpretation of each spouse's contributions to the marriage. What that does is it puts couples in a place where they're incentivized to go into the courtroom and sling mud at each other and say, no, they didn't do all the work. I did everything. Yeah, they may have worked, but I did all the work on the home front, or I earned all the money and they got to sit at home. When that happens, settling a case becomes very, very difficult. And it's very easy to take all of that emotion and all the anger and all the resentment. That is the reason that you're getting divorced in the first place, and turn that into an expensive legal battle. You can take that all off the table by deciding ahead of time what you think is fair at a time when your love is at an all-time high, when your communication is at an all-time high, right? What is the better time to have a discussion about what would be fair? Is it when you're in love with each other and you're getting married and you're willing to be fair, or is it when you can't stand each other?
That's right. That's
And
right. And then similar again to estate planning, where I decided to do my estate planning when I was healthy and young and still like in my full faculties versus waiting until you're sick. And you got to think about some hard decisions. As someone who's already married, am I just like shit out of luck because I didn't do a prenup at the beginning of my marriage? What advice do you have for people who are already in the thick of marriage?
In 49 out of 50 states, you can do a postnup. Iowa, we're waiting for them to get on board. I think it's only a matter of time. But often couples will do a postnup if they are already married, where they can sit down and have these same conversations. They can decide what's mine, what's yours, what's ours. They get a reset button in terms of doing these financial disclosures. It's never too late to sit down, and you do a prenup or postnup or not. It certainly does not hurt to sit down with your spouse and lay out all of your assets and debts, put it down in writing, and make sure that you're on the same page in terms of this is mine, this is yours, this is ours. And yeah, in a worst case scenario, let's use that kind of estate planning example. It's something that certainly we hope that we never have to deal with, but can we agree what would be fair at a time that we get along and that we love each other, so that worst case scenario, we don't have that argument using lawyers and 20% of our assets to fight it out later.
Let me ask you this. Have you seen a trend at all in postnups, or is it still like a relatively new concept for people?
Both prenups and postnups are exploding in popularity. I think in 2000, maybe about 3% of married couples had prenups. Today, it's more like 15%. So 5x over the last 20-something years in terms of prenups. And postnups are going the exact same direction, where a lot of times it's a couple who realizes, hey, we do have things that I consider mine, or you do have things that you consider yours. And let's just say, okay, maybe everything that we own, we consider to be ours. We consider to be joint assets that we would split 50-50, except I keep my business and you keep your 401k. Or I keep my car, you keep your car. I keep the inheritance that came from my family, you keep your family's inheritance. And just if you agree on that, then fantastic. You can take any potential argument about that off the table now and forever. And if you don't agree, well, great. It's also good because you've at least exposed that you're not on the same page, and you're giving yourself an opportunity to get on the same page in terms of who owns what, who's responsible for what debts, at a time when you can still communicate intelligently about it and hopefully come to an agreement.
I love how you frame that, because so many people that I coach, they try to avoid conflict, thinking that's what's going to keep the peace, but actually, quote unquote, creating a little bit of that conflict by bringing these issues forward leads you faster to a resolution and exposing what might have been a crack in your communication or your expectations of your partner. So I love that reframing. And since this series is about author to author conversations, how did you find writing the book? Did you enjoy being an author?
I loved it. I think that writing a book not only are you taking everything that you've learned over the course of your career and trying to share it to other people to be helpful, to be of service to your readers, but it also forces you to crystallize your own thoughts, to really hone in because you're forced to put it on paper. All of everything that you've gained in terms of your knowledge over the course of your career and put it in a digestible format to make it helpful for other people. So I love hearing good feedback about the book and that it is helpful to other people, but it selfishly was also a big help to myself as well.
That's awesome. So, if people want to check out the book, again, the book is The Prenup Prescription by Erin Thomas, and we'll have the link to the book in the show notes. But if people want to work with you on getting their prenups in order, how can they find you?
We are at prenups.com, prenups.com. And you can also follow me on Instagram. I'm at prenup guy.
Why did you get prenups.com? I feel like that would have been a hard domain to get. That's awesome. It's easy to find. Prenups.com, the prenup guy. And if you are interested in learning more about this resource and other resources that might help you on your financial journey, you can check out our free guide. It's at crushyourmoneygoals.com/free guide. We'll have his information included here as well. And I appreciate you so much. On a last parting word, for anyone who is just looking to improve their finances as a couple, what's advice you have for people in 2025?
I would say start small. You don't have to go and rush out and get your prenup or postnup tomorrow, but sitting down and having a conversation with your spouse about the financial rules of your relationship is really an investment in the future of your relationship.
I love that. Thank you for all your wisdom today, Aaron.
Thanks so much for having me, Bernadette.
If you like this episode, feel free to subscribe using the link here below and check out more episodes on how to crush your money goals on our YouTube series. See you next time.